Case 1. Robert Bever. It's 11:30 p.m. on the 22nd of July 2015. In the manicured suburb of Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, the neighborhood of Indian Springs is usually a sanctuary of silence. But on this night, a 911 dispatcher receives a call that would change the community forever. There is no one speaking clearly on the other end, just the sound of a disturbance and a faint plea for help before the line disconnects.
Broken Arrow 911. Broken Arrow 911. Hello?
Hello.
Hi, where are you at?
Broken Arrow, Oklahoma 7411.
When police arrive on East Magnolia Court, they immediately sense something is wrong. On the front porch of a large two-story brick home, there are visible signs of a struggle leading inside. Officers knock, and from behind the door comes a barely audible whisper, "Help me." Inside, they find 13-year-old Crystal severely injured but alive. As first responders rush her to safety, she tells them something almost impossible to comprehend. Her brothers, one 8-year-old, Robert, and one 6-year-old, Michael, were responsible for attacking the family. What officers discover inside unfolds room by room. Several family members have suffered fatal injuries. 2 young children are found downstairs. Upstairs, their father David and one 2-year-old Daniel are located. Their mother, April, is found in the living room after desperately trying to defend herself and her children. In total, 5 lives are lost that night. In an upstairs bedroom, officers make a discovery that adds another layer of heartbreak. The youngest sibling, 2-year-old Autumn, is found asleep and unharmed, unaware of what has happened. The 2 suspects are no longer inside the house. They fled into a wooded area behind the property. A K-9 unit quickly tracks them to a nearby creek bed. Robert and Michael are taken into custody without further incident. Officers later note their unusual calm demeanor during arrest. As morning breaks over Broken Arrow, the community struggles to process what happened. The Bever family had been known as quiet and private. They homeschooled their children and kept largely to themselves. Many neighbors say they knew very little about them. During interrogation, investigators uncover a disturbing motive. According to court records, Robert told detectives that he and his brother wanted notoriety. They had discussed becoming infamous and studied other high-profile violent offenders. Investigators later revealed that the brothers had planned the attack for more than a year, purchasing weapons and protective gear online and discussing future plans to continue harming others. Their plan began to unravel almost immediately. When their mother asked Crystal to speak with her brothers about household chores, she entered their room and saw them preparing in a way that alarmed her. What followed was chaotic and loud, far from the silent scenario they had imagined. Crystal resisted and fought to survive, disrupting the brothers' plan. In the confusion, one 2-year-old Daniel managed to reach a phone and dial 911 while being pursued. Investigators believe that call may have saved the lives of Crystal and Autumn. The legal consequences were significant. In 2016, Robert Bever pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault with intent to kill. He received 6 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. While incarcerated, he later received additional sentences for attacking prison staff. Michael Bever, who was 16 at the time of the crimes, was not eligible for the death penalty. His defense argued he was heavily influenced by his older brother, but prosecutors maintained he acted willingly. In 2018, he was convicted on all counts and sentenced to multiple consecutive life terms. Under Oklahoma law, he must serve 85% of each sentence before being eligible for parole consideration, meaning he will spend the majority of his life in prison. In 2019, the home on Magnolia Court was demolished. In its place, Reflection Park was created a memorial garden intended to provide peace and healing for the community. Today, it stands as a reminder of the lives lost and the lasting impact of that night. Welcome to Cold Read Crimes. Oklahoma is often associated with wide-open plains, red dirt, and strong family values. Yet, like many places, it has faced devastating domestic tragedies that have forced difficult conversations about justice, mental health, and prevention. Between 2000 and 2025, several deeply troubling family-related cases reshaped legal discussions in the state. These are not just headlines, they are complex stories involving warning signs, systemic gaps, and the unimaginable reality of violence within a home. In this series, we'll examine 10 Oklahoma cases that left a permanent mark on the state, beginning with the tragic events in Broken Arrow. We'll explore how the justice system responded, what warning signs were missed, and how communities attempt to heal after betrayal from within. These stories are heavy, they are complex, and they require us to confront uncomfortable truths about human behavior and responsibility. Before we move on to the next case, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city and the current weather in the comments. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. If you appreciate in-depth investigative storytelling and want to support more research-driven cases like this, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. We're just getting started as we explore Oklahoma's most impactful criminal cases. Case 2. Jesse McFadden. On the morning of the 1st of May 2023, the small community of Henrietta, Oklahoma, woke up to a growing sense of unease. A typical Monday in Muscogee County usually moves at a quiet, rural pace. But this day felt different. In a local courtroom, a trial was scheduled to begin for 9-year-old Jesse McFadden. He was facing new felony charges involving alleged inappropriate contact with a minor and illegal material offenses, prosecutors said, occurred while he was still incarcerated for a prior conviction. But when the judge called the court to order, McFadden did not appear. As court officials waited, a far more urgent situation was unfolding just miles away. An Amber Alert lit up phones across Oklahoma. 2 teenage girls, one 4-year-old, Ivy Webster, and one 6-year-old Brittany Brewer, had been reported missing. They had gone to a weekend sleepover at the home of a friend, Tiffany Guess. They were last believed to be traveling in a white Chevrolet Avalanche, driven by Tiffany's stepfather, Jesse McFadden. Law enforcement quickly descended on the McFadden property, a rural, wooded area roughly 90 miles east of Oklahoma City. What began as a search for 2 missing teens soon transformed into one of the most devastating investigations in recent state history. Near a wooded creek area on the property, investigators made a heartbreaking discovery. All 6 individuals who lived in or were staying at the home, along with McFadden himself, were found deceased. The victims were identified as McFadden's wife, 5-year-old Holly Guess, and her 3 children, one 7-year-old Riley Allen, one 5-year-old Michael Mayo, and one 3-year-old Tiffany Guess. Also among them were their 2 guests, Ivy and Brittany. Authorities later confirmed that all 6 victims had been fatally shot. McFadden had taken his own life. The tragedy immediately raised urgent questions about how someone with McFadden's history had been living in a home filled with children. To understand the outrage that followed, many pointed to what some critics later called systemic gaps in oversight. In 2003, McFadden had been convicted of a serious violent offense and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Yet in October 2020, he was released nearly 3 years early. How? Under Oklahoma's sentencing structure, certain offenders must serve at least 85% of their sentence. However, credits for program participation and institutional compliance can reduce time served once that threshold is reached. Records showed McFadden had accumulated various credits during his incarceration. More troubling to many was the fact that while still serving his original sentence, he had been charged in 2017 with using a contraband cell phone to communicate inappropriately with a minor. Those charges were still pending when he was released. Because they were not resolved before his initial sentence technically concluded under the credit system, there was no automatic mechanism keeping him in custody at that time. As details emerged, attention turned to the environment inside the home. In interviews, Holly Guess's mother, Jeanette Mayo, described McFadden as reserved in public but controlling in private. She alleged that he closely monitored the family's movements and isolated them from others. Holly, she said, believed his explanations about his past and accepted his claims that he had changed. The night before the tragedy, investigators later revealed that McFadden sent troubling messages to the young woman connected to the pending charges, someone who was expected to testify in the upcoming trial. In those messages, he expressed anger and blamed her for jeopardizing what he described as his great life. The tone of the messages suggested he did not intend to return to prison. In the aftermath, grief quickly turned into calls for reform. Families of the victims, including Brittany Brewer's father, Nathan, and Ivy Webster's parents, began advocating for changes to Oklahoma's sentencing laws. They pushed for stricter limitations on early release credits for individuals convicted of serious violent crimes. Their efforts contributed to legislative discussions that ultimately led to the expansion of Loria and Ashley's Law in 2025. The updated law strengthened requirements that certain violent offenders serve the full duration of their court-ordered sentences without reductions through accumulated credits. Today, Henrietta continues to heal. Brittany Brewer had recently won a local pageant title and was preparing to represent her town. Ivy Webster was known for her love of softball and animals. Riley Allen was a gifted artist who dreamed of becoming a doctor. Michael and Tiffany were remembered for their close bond with friends and family. Holly Guess was described as a devoted mother. Their lives were filled with plans, ambitions, and milestones yet to come. The 1st of May 2023 remains a date the town will never forget, not only for the loss it represents, but for the questions it forced the state to confront about accountability, oversight, and prevention. Case 3. Rebecca Hogue. Imagine coming home from a long double shift, exhausted but looking forward to a few quiet hours before your toddler wakes up. On New Year's Day 2020, that was Rebecca Hogue's reality. The 8-year-old mother lived in a duplex in Norman, Oklahoma, and had spent New Year's Eve working a high-profile event at a local casino to support her 2-year-old son, Jeremiah Ryder Johnson Jr. When she returned home in the early morning hours, her boyfriend, 8-year-old Christopher Trent, was there. The house was quiet. She checked on Ryder, kissed him as he appeared to be asleep, and went to bed. Later that morning, she woke to an unsettling silence. Trent was gone. His car was missing. When she went to wake Ryder, she realized something was terribly wrong. He was unresponsive. Her frantic 911 call captured a mother in panic as emergency operators attempted to guide her through CPR. Paramedics rushed Ryder to Norman Regional Medical Center, but he could not be revived. The medical examiner later determined that Ryder had suffered fatal injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. Investigators also noted damage inside the home that suggested a violent incident had occurred while Rebecca was at work. As the Norman Police Department began searching for Christopher Trent, the case shifted again. 3 days later, Trent was found deceased in the Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge, roughly 90 miles away. Authorities concluded he had taken his own life. Investigators reported that he left behind a message indicating responsibility for Ryder's death. With the primary suspect gone, many assumed the legal process would end there. Instead, the case took a highly controversial turn. In July 2020, Cleveland County District Attorney Greg Mashburn charged Rebecca Hogue not with neglect, but with first-degree murder under Oklahoma's failure to protect statute. The law allows prosecutors to hold a caregiver criminally responsible if they knowingly allow a child to remain in a dangerous situation. In this case, the prosecution argued that Rebecca should have recognized warning signs in the weeks before Ryder's death. They cited minor bruising she had noticed and photographed. Rebecca had confronted Trent about those marks, but he reportedly dismissed them as typical toddler injuries. During the investigation, Rebecca told authorities she had researched signs of domestic abuse because she wanted to be cautious. She later said she believed she was taking appropriate steps to protect her son. It also emerged that Trent had prior protective orders filed against him. Information Rebecca said she did not know at the time. The trial drew national attention and was later featured in the documentary series Accused, Guilty or Innocent. The proceedings became a broader debate about maternal accountability and domestic abuse dynamics. In a surprising development, the lead detective on the case testified that he did not agree with charging Rebecca with murder. The defense argued that she was a victim of coercive control and had no clear indication that Trent would escalate to lethal violence while she was away at work. In November 2021, the jury returned a guilty verdict. They recommended a sentence of life in prison with the possibility of parole. The decision stunned many observers and reignited debate about the scope of the failure to protect law. However, in February 2022, the presiding judge issued a modified sentence. While he upheld the conviction, he suspended all but 16 months of her sentence. Because Rebecca had already served significant time while awaiting trial, she was released shortly afterward. As of 2025, the Rebecca Hogue case remains a focal point in discussions about criminal justice reform in Oklahoma. Advocates argue that failure to protect laws can disproportionately impact mothers who are themselves experiencing manipulation or abuse. Supporters of the statute maintain that the law is necessary to ensure every adult in a child's life is held accountable for safety. The case raises difficult questions. How much should someone be expected to foresee? When does trust become negligence? And where is the line between victim and responsibility? Rebecca Hogue's story underscores a painful legal reality. Sometimes the most complicated cases are not about what someone did, but about what the law believes they should have prevented. Case 4. Alicia Adams. In the town of Cyril, Oklahoma, life moves at a slower pace. With a population of fewer than 800 people, it's the kind of community where neighbors know one another by name, and many residents speak of a sense of safety that feels untouched by the noise of larger cities. But in January 2023, that sense of security was shaken. On January 10, a local mail carrier was making his usual route along Nebraska Avenue when he noticed something deeply concerning. A 5-year-old girl was wandering alone outside in the cold. She wasn't wearing a coat, and there were no adults nearby. When he gently tried to speak with her, she couldn't explain where she lived or why she was outside by herself. The mail carrier contacted local authorities. Officers quickly identified the child and began asking questions. As they worked to determine her living situation, they learned she had a 4-year-old sister, Athena Brownfield. But Athena was nowhere to be found. What began as a welfare check quickly turned into a statewide search effort. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, OSBI, took the lead. Drones, search teams, K-9 units, and volunteers combed through fields, waterways, and abandoned structures in and around Cyril. The small town became the center of intense public attention as days passed without answers. Investigators soon focused on the girl's caregivers, 3-1-year-old Alicia Adams, and her husband, 3, 6-year-old Yvonne Adams. It was revealed that Athena and her sister had been left in the Adams' care nearly 2 years earlier by their biological mother. During that time, the girls were not enrolled in school and had limited documented medical care. Authorities later described the situation as an example of gaps within informal or kinship caregiving arrangements, where children are placed with relatives or non-guardians without consistent state oversight. The turning point in the investigation came during questioning. According to court affidavits, Alicia Adams eventually told investigators that Athena had died weeks earlier, around Christmas 2022. Based on her statements, authorities alleged that Yvonne Adams had physically disciplined the child on Christmas night in a manner that resulted in her death. Investigators further alleged that he later transported her body to a rural property near Rush Springs and buried her there. On the 17th of January 2023, OSBI agents searched the property described in the confession. Human remains were recovered and later identified as Athena Brownfield. While the recovery provided answers about her whereabouts, the legal process that followed became more complex. In 2024, the medical examiner's report determined that Athena's cause of death was acute pneumonia, complicated by severe malnutrition. This finding adjusted the direction of the prosecution's case. Yvonne Adams, who had initially faced first-degree murder charges, later saw those charges modified to second-degree murder. Meanwhile, Caddo County District Attorney Jason Hicks pursued significant charges against Alicia Adams as well, arguing that prolonged neglect and efforts to mislead investigators contributed to the child's death. In early 2025, prosecutors filed notice that they intended to seek the death penalty against Alicia Adams, citing the severity of the neglect and the circumstances surrounding the case. Legal proceedings are ongoing, and the case continues to move through the courts. Beyond the courtroom, Athena Brownfield's death prompted legislative action. Lawmakers cited her case as a catalyst for reforming Oklahoma's oversight of long-term kinship placements. Prior to 2023, children placed informally with relatives or non-guardians could remain outside structured monitoring systems for extended periods. Following public pressure, new policies were introduced requiring increased welfare checks and better documentation of school enrollment and medical care for children in such arrangements. In a town as small as Cyril, the impact remains personal. Residents who once described their community as untouched by tragedy now speak openly about the need for vigilance and accountability. Athena's story is not only about one family, it is about how systems respond when children fall outside traditional oversight structures. It is about how warning signs can go unseen. And it is about how reform often arrives only after irreversible loss. As we continue through these cases, a pattern emerges. Meaningful change frequently comes too late for the child at the center of the story. But in the aftermath, communities are left to decide whether that loss will remain a headline or become a turning point. Case 5. Brandy McCaslin. In the heat of an Oklahoma July, fireworks are a familiar sound. Between Independence Day celebrations and summer festivals, the crackle of Roman candles usually signals a gathering or a neighborhood event. But on the 20th of July 2023, in the Tulsa suburb of Verdigris, bright flashes coming from a residential garage were not part of a celebration. They were a distress signal. At approximately 4 p.m., a Verdigris police officer was on routine patrol near East Dogwood Court and Cypress Street when he noticed Roman candles being fired from inside a closed garage. The sparks scattered across the driveway in an irregular pattern that immediately felt wrong. The officer stopped to investigate. Inside the garage, he found a woman and 2 children who had been locked in from the outside. The woman, visibly shaken, explained that she had agreed to supervise a court-ordered visitation between a mother and her children. She said that shortly after the visit began, the mother 39-year-old, Brandy McCaslin, produced a handgun. According to investigators, McCaslin forced the supervisor and 2 other children into the garage and locked them inside before retreating into the main part of the home with her own 3 children. 1-year-old Noe, 6-year-old Bryce, and 1-0-month-old Billy Jacobson. Police quickly called for backup. Within minutes, multiple agencies responded, including the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation and a specialized SWAT team from the Cherokee Nation. The quiet cul-de-sac transformed into an active emergency scene as officers worked to assess the situation. For nearly 3 hours, negotiators attempted to make contact. They used loudspeakers, phone calls, and other communication methods in an effort to convince McCaslin to come outside safely with the children. Neighbors watched anxiously from their homes as law enforcement surrounded the property, but there was no response from inside. At approximately 7 p.m., after repeated attempts at communication failed, tactical officers entered the home. Inside a back bedroom, they discovered McCaslin and her 3 children deceased. Authorities later confirmed that McCaslin had taken the lives of her children before taking her own. The tragedy left the verdigris community in shock and raised urgent questions about how a supervised visitation intended as a protective measure could end in such loss. As investigators reviewed the circumstances leading up to July 20, attention turned to warning signs that had surfaced months earlier. Billy Jacobson, Sr., the father of the youngest child, spoke publicly in the aftermath. He described concerns about McCaslin's mental health and said she had experienced significant emotional struggles in the months prior. Police records showed that officers had previously responded to the home for domestic disputes and welfare checks. Earlier in 2023, McCaslin had experienced a mental health crisis involving a firearm, an incident family members intervened in before anyone was harmed. Despite those documented concerns, the court-approved visitation schedule remained in place. The visit was classified as supervised, but the designated supervisor was a family acquaintance rather than a trained professional. In the wake of the tragedy, many questioned whether the safeguards were strong enough. Billy Jacobson, Sr., brought his concerns to the Oklahoma State Capitol, advocating for changes to how supervised visitations are handled, particularly in cases involving documented mental health crises or domestic conflict. He called for stricter requirements, including professional supervision and mandatory psychological evaluations in higher-risk situations. This case reshaped conversations in Oklahoma about parental rights, mental health intervention, and the limits of court-ordered supervision. It raises difficult questions. Should the state intervene more aggressively when mental health warning signs appear? Or does expanding that authority risk overreach into family autonomy? I'd like to hear your perspective. Share your thoughts in the comments, but please keep the discussion respectful of the families and community affected. In 2025, Oklahoma lawmakers began debating Senate Bill 1756, legislation inspired in part by the McCaslin case. The proposal would require parents with a documented history of recent suicide attempts or domestic violence allegations to undergo a professional psychological evaluation before being granted even supervised visitation. For the people of verdigris, policy discussions cannot undo what happened. Neighbors still remember the children they saw riding bikes and playing outside. Noe, who loved creative projects, Bryce, who rarely sat still, and baby Billy, often seen in a tiny baseball cap matching his father's. Their names are now part of Oklahoma's legal and legislative history, and their case stands as a sobering reminder that systems designed to protect children must constantly evolve, especially when warning signs are already on record. Case 6. Jaron Pridgeon. In the early morning hours of the 2nd of February 2021, A cold winter night blanketed the city of Muscogee, Oklahoma. Around 1:30 a.m., the quiet of a home on Indiana Street was broken when a 911 call alerted police to a serious incident inside the residence. When officers arrived, they encountered two 5-year-old Jaron Diajon Pridgeon outside the home holding a firearm. After a brief confrontation, Pridgeon fled on foot, prompting a short pursuit before he was safely taken into custody. Inside the home, responders discovered multiple family members in critical condition. 5 children, ranging in age from 1 to 9 years old, were affected, along with a young adult, 4-year-old Javarian Lee, Pridgeon's brother. One child was rushed to a nearby hospital but, despite medical efforts, did not survive. The children were identified as Jalaiah Pridgeon, 1, Jidus Pridgeon, 3, Harmony Anderson, 5, Nevaeh Pridgeon, 6, and Quidance Anderson, 9. The only surviving adult in the home was the children's mother, Brittany Anderson, who was transported to a trauma center for treatment and later recovered. The tragedy shook the Muscogee community, as investigators confirmed that Pridgeon was the father of 3 of the children. This was not a random act. It occurred within a family home, emphasizing the importance of safety and awareness in domestic settings. Records revealed that Pridgeon had prior legal history. In 2019, he was charged with assault-related offenses and completed probation, which included a court-ordered mental health evaluation. Despite these interventions, he remained in the community until the events of 2021. The legal proceedings following the incident were complex. District Judge Brett Smith restricted media access to preliminary hearings to protect the privacy of surviving family members. Local news outlets, including the Muscogee Phoenix, challenged this decision, advocating for public transparency. Pridgeon's defense pursued a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, citing previous mental health evaluations. Over the next 3 years, multiple assessments were conducted to determine his competency to stand trial. On the 4th of October 2024, the case reached its conclusion. Pridgeon entered a guilty plea to 6 counts of first-degree murder. Prosecutors, after consulting with Brittany Anderson and the extended family, agreed to a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case prompted statewide discussion about probation policies, mental health support, and the importance of early intervention when warning signs are present. In response, community leaders, clergy, and the mayor's office established a memorial fund to support Brittany Anderson as she began to rebuild her life. The Muscogee tragedy remains one of Oklahoma's most impactful cases in recent years. While the legal proceedings are complete, the story continues to highlight the importance of protective measures, community awareness, and the need for systems designed to safeguard families. Case 7. Rachel Henry. In the quiet moments of early motherhood, there is a sound that defines the bond between parent and child, the soft, rhythmic hum of a nursery rhyme. For most, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, or a gentle lullaby signals safety, warmth, and calm. But in January 2020, in a modest home near 24th Street and Baseline Road in Phoenix, those same melodies became tied to a case that would challenge investigators and psychologists alike. The story of Rachel Henry technically concluded in Arizona, but its roots trace back to Prague, Oklahoma. It highlights the risks when a parent struggles with mental health or substance issues, and how systems can sometimes fail to prevent tragedy. On the 20th of January 2020, Phoenix police received a 911 call from a woman appearing highly distressed. Officers arriving at the home encountered 2-year-old Rachel Henry. Inside, 3 young children, 3-year-old Zane, 1-year-old Miriah, and 7-month-old Catalia were unresponsive on a couch. Initial appearances suggested they were asleep, but further investigation confirmed a tragic outcome. Henry cooperated with investigators, providing an account of the events that unfolded that day. Her explanation indicated a prolonged period of impaired judgment linked to her mental state. During this time, she had been grappling with severe stress and psychological challenges, which ultimately contributed to the loss of her children. Further investigation revealed a significant history in Oklahoma. Prior to moving to Phoenix, Oklahoma's Department of Human Services, DHS, had intervened in Henry's life due to concerns over her methamphetamine use and her ability to provide a safe environment. The children had been temporarily removed from her care and returned only after a safety plan was implemented, which included specific stipulations regarding supervision and separation from certain adults. However, those safeguards were not fully maintained, and the family later relocated to Arizona, placing them out of the jurisdiction of the Oklahoma caseworkers who were familiar with their history. Rachel Henry's mental health and intent became central to the legal case. Experts categorized her actions as linked to severe psychological distress, sometimes referred to as altruistic filicide, where a parent may believe they are sparing their children from harm. The prosecution, however, emphasized a series of deliberate decisions that led to the tragic outcome. After a multi-year legal process, in December 2024, Rachel Henry pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder. As part of a plea agreement, she received 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The children Zane, Miriah, and Catalaya were returned to Oklahoma for burial in McFadden, near where their story with Child Protective Services had first begun. Their lives, though brief, prompted reflection on how states track and manage high-risk families, particularly when relocation across state lines occurs. The Rachel Henry case stands as a stark example of the intersection between parental, mental health, substance use, and systemic oversight. It underscores the critical need for consistent monitoring and communication between child welfare agencies across state lines to prevent families from slipping through the cracks. As we move toward the next case, the theme becomes clear. Sometimes, the most pressing dangers are not sudden acts of violence, but the quiet unraveling of a family system, leaving behind unanswered questions and a call for stronger protective measures. Case 8. The Mountain Mystery. In the true crime history of Oklahoma, some cases are defined by swift investigation, while others are defined by lingering questions. Few cases combine both mystery and unanswered questions, like that of the Jamison family, a story that begins with a trance-like departure and ends in the remote Oklahoma mountains, leaving behind clues that still puzzle investigators more than 15 years later. On Thursday morning, the 8th of October 2009, 4-year-old Bobby Jamison, his 40-year-old wife Sherilyn, and their 6-year-old daughter Madison left their home in Eufaula. They were heading 30 miles south to the rugged Sans Bois Mountains near Red Oak to inspect a 40-acre property. With them was their small pit bull, Maisie, and enough supplies for a day trip. After that morning, the family was not seen alive again. One of the most unusual pieces of evidence came from a security camera outside their home. The footage showed Bobby and Sherilyn moving methodically between the house and their truck. Observers have described their behavior as trance-like, moving with unusual focus, pausing at times to stare ahead, not speaking to one another, and not interacting with the camera. After nearly an hour of this activity, they drove away and vanished into the morning. 8 days later, hunters discovered the family's pickup truck in a remote part of Latimer County. The vehicle was locked, with wallets, ID cards, and phones inside. The family dog, Maisie, was found alive, though alone, after a week without food or water. Among the belongings was a surprising sum of $32,000 in cash, suggesting the family had not planned to be away from the truck for long. The discovery deepened the mystery of their disappearance. A massive search followed, involving over 100 law enforcement officers and hundreds of volunteers combing the Sans-Bois range. Investigators explored the Jamisons' private lives for potential clues. Before the disappearance, Bobby had been involved in a legal dispute with his father, including allegations of criminal activity and personal threats. That conflict, though mostly resolved by the time of their disappearance, added another layer of complexity to the case. The family also reported unusual spiritual experiences. Bobby and Sherilyn told their pastor, Gary Brandon, that they believed their house was haunted. They described their daughter, Madison, speaking of a child who had died decades earlier. Unusual notes and messages were found in their storage container, including letters and writings that reflected family tension and anxiety. For 4 years, the Sans-Bois Mountains held the Jamisons' secret. Theories ranged from a financial dispute to involvement with outside groups or even a shared psychological crisis. Yet nothing could be confirmed until November 2013, when 2 deer hunters discovered skeletal remains on a remote, heavily wooded hillside near Kinta, roughly 2.7 miles from the abandoned truck. By July 2014, dental records confirmed the remains belonged to Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison Jamison. The discovery provided closure on their location, but not on the circumstances of their deaths. Due to decomposition, the medical examiner could not determine the exact cause, noting only that one small anomaly existed on Bobby's skull. The deaths were ultimately classified as suspicious, and the case remains officially unsolved. The Jamison family mystery highlights how even high-profile missing persons cases can become invisible in the vastness of rural Oklahoma. Despite advanced search technology, trained K-9 units, and hundreds of volunteers, the family lay less than 3 miles from their vehicle for years. Their story remains a reminder of the challenges in tracking and protecting vulnerable families, especially when unusual behavior and internal tensions are involved. As we move to the final cases, attention shifts from the mountains to the courtrooms of Oklahoma City, where the legal definition of protection and parental responsibility would be tested in ways that shaped state policy for years to come. Case 9. Katherine Green. On a spring morning in April 2017, the city of Enid, Oklahoma, was about to witness a legal case that would redefine the boundaries of maternal responsibility and child protection in the state. Workers at a local construction site discovered a small, homemade wooden box among discarded materials. Inside were the remains of a newborn infant, turning a routine day into a complex legal question. Authorities quickly identified 4-year-old Katherine Juanita Green as the mother. Forensic analysis revealed that the infant, a boy who had been stillborn, showed no external injuries. However, toxicology testing indicated the presence of methamphetamine, and the medical examiner classified the cause of death as drug-related, designating the manner of death as a homicide. The state of Oklahoma, through the Garfield County District Attorney, charged Green under felony child neglect, a statute rarely applied to a fetus. Prosecutors argued that Green had exposed the developing child to illegal substances during the 33rd week of pregnancy, constituting neglect. The case immediately faced legal hurdles. Green's defense contended that under the Oklahoma Children's Code, a child refers to a person after birth. They argued that the statute was designed to protect living children, not to criminalize prenatal behavior. District Judge Dennis Haladik agreed, dismissing the charge and noting that the lower court could not expand the law to include a fetus. The state appealed to the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals, OCCA, where the case drew national attention. For 3 years, State v. Green sparked debate over the criminalization of pregnancy and the balance between public safety and maternal rights. In 2020, the OCCA reversed the lower court's ruling. The court held that, for the purposes of the state's child neglect statute, child could include a fetus. Judges emphasized that legislative intent was to protect all children under 18, including the period before birth, and concluded that a mother's legal responsibility begins once her actions can harm the developing child. The ruling had immediate consequences. By 2021, Oklahoma saw a significant increase in pregnancy-related prosecutions, with Kay County accounting for a disproportionate number of cases. Supporters hailed the decision as a safeguard for unborn children, while medical professionals raised concerns. Over 30 doctors in Oklahoma signed a public statement warning that the fear of prosecution discouraged pregnant women from seeking prenatal care and substance use treatment. Katherine Green's case set a precedent that continues to influence policy and prosecutions in Oklahoma. It positioned the state as one of the most stringent in the nation regarding maternal conduct during pregnancy, highlighting the legal weight carried by the role of parenthood even before a child is born. As we turn to our final case, we move from legal precedent to a community gripped by immediate tragedy, 2 weeks in Sand Springs, that would forever change the conversation around domestic violence in Oklahoma. Case 10. Juanita Gomez. In the late summer of 2016, Oklahoma City carried the usual rhythm of the metro area, but inside a residence on North McKinley Avenue, a serious domestic incident was unfolding. Neighbors described the home as ordinary, yet what happened there would be considered one of the most severe maternal-related crimes in the city's history. The investigation began on the 27th of August 2016, when Francisco Merlos arrived at the home of his girlfriend, 3-year-old Juanita Gomez. Concerned that he had not been able to reach her, he entered the residence and was met by Juanita's mother, 1-year-old Juanita Gomez. Emergency services were contacted and law enforcement quickly arrived. Police found that Juanita had been seriously harmed and that an altercation had taken place. Objects in the home had been used in ways consistent with attempts to subdue or restrain her. During questioning, Juanita Gomez explained that she believed her daughter was experiencing a severe spiritual or psychological crisis. She described actions intended to intervene based on her perception of possession or spiritual influence. As the case moved toward trial in 2018, attention shifted to Juanita Gomez's mental state. Her defense argued she was unable to understand the situation due to delusions. The state's psychological evaluation concluded that she was competent and understood the nature and consequences of her actions. At trial, the jury carefully considered the evidence and testimony. They determined that Gomez's actions were deliberate and that legal standards for criminal responsibility applied. She was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The Gomez case continues to serve as a reference for law enforcement and mental health professionals in evaluating domestic incidents involving claims of spiritual influence or delusional beliefs. It remains a sobering reminder of the complex intersections between family dynamics, mental health, and criminal accountability. Over the past 25 years, Oklahoma has faced some of its most challenging family-related cases. From the Broken Arrow home that became a house of horrors to courtroom battles over parental responsibility, each case forced the state to confront gaps in child protection, domestic violence response, and community oversight. By 2025, substantial reforms have reshaped the state's legal and child welfare systems. Laws like Loria and Ashley's Law now ensure that those who enable abuse can no longer benefit from procedural loopholes. The 2025 Pinnacle Plan brought increased transparency and oversight to child welfare, helping prevent tragedies like those experienced by Athena Brownfield. Reforms in kinship care, domestic violence resources, and professional supervision of court-ordered visits have strengthened protections for vulnerable children. The legacies of families such as Ryder Johnson's and Juanita Gomez's continue to inform policy and practice, ensuring that lessons from past tragedies are not forgotten. Justice in Oklahoma is a living process, not just the outcome of trials, but also the ongoing work of survivors, communities, and advocates. Memorials, policy reforms, and proactive interventions stand as reminders that understanding and prevention are as important as legal accountability. These cases guide the state toward a future where vulnerable children are better protected and communities are more informed. As we close this investigation, I'd love to know what time is it where you're watching. It's fascinating to see when our community of true crime enthusiasts is most active worldwide. Thank you for joining us on Cold Read Crimes. If this exploration of Oklahoma's history gave you insight into family law and systemic reform, please like and share this story. Your support allows us to continue uncovering stories that shed light on complex realities. Stay aware, stay informed, and stay safe.